Okay, so in this portion of the social psychology lecture I'm going to go over some really powerful social psychology principles. Uh, we can use these principles to explain 9/11, the Columbine Massacre, but the one that I'm choosing to focus on is it's called the Guyana tragedy, and I believe it happened in 1978, so that's before a lot of you were born. Um, However, it's very powerful, and I want to share it with you. Is what happened is this guy named Jim Jones. He started a cult. Well, he started a religious group, and eventually he took his religious group. It was up in San Francisco. He decided that they wanted to start a new colony in Guyana, which is an area off of in South America, and so they had this big, huge colony there, and they were, just run by his organization, and they had committed themselves to God. But then a senator was informed by a lot of the families of the people that he had taken down there that, what's happening to all these people? What is he doing? Can you go check on them? So the senator went down, and the senator said, anyone who wants to leave can come back with me. And he said, I'm going to make statements, you know, uh, talk to people about this, what you have going on here. So by that time, Jim Jones had gotten somewhat paranoid, and we'll talk about why that happens. And he decided that the entire group needed to commit suicide. So I have a video that I'd like to show you that kind of is a reenactment of this. And what you're going to see is I believe it's 968 people commit a mass suicide. And so I want to explain why people do these kind of things, what leads to it. And so the really powerful social psychology principles that I'll be talking about for the rest of the social psychology lectures are social roles, conformity, compliance, obedience, and cognitive dissonance. So I'll go through and define each of these later in the lecture. But first of all, let's see what is necessary in order to be a cult leader. So this is How to Be a Cult Leader 101. Like I said, we're going to see a video where one man tells close to 1,000 people to commit suicide, and they do. So these are some things that you really need to look for as far as social psychology. And I'm going to say something that may be uncomfortable for some of you to hear, but I believe in being honest about what I feel and what I know. So there's no real strong line between a cult and a religion. Most all religions start as a cult. And when the numbers grow big enough, then the government will usually recognize it as a religion. So some things that call themselves a religion, even just like a single church, if you have someone who demonstrates these principles or something, then it's dangerous. So let's see what we have. So anyway, what I'm saying there is any group could be kind of dangerous if they're using these social psychology principles in a very powerful way. So the first thing that we need is we need a dogmatic leader. So a dogmatic leader is a person that says, this is the way, it's my way or the highway. And what you're going to see with the Jim Jones is he's beautiful at this, absolutely beautiful. He is, every question that goes to him, he's able to do it with just a straight face, not too much emotion. He uses all this just logic. Listen to the logic that he uses throughout the whole thing. Even though the logic to me sounds absolutely ridiculous, he packages it so it just looks beautiful. So in order for somebody to gain complete obedience, we're going to see that's one of the social psychology principles, is you need someone who continues to say something again and again and again. This must happen. This must happen. And the more that you can do it with a straight face, the more people kind of believe in you. That, oh, I shouldn't be questioning this. Okay, so now we've got a dogmatic leader. We've got somebody who says, this is the way, absolutely the way, don't question me. Now, let's see what the next thing is. So, probably anybody can get drawn into a cult, and that's why this lesson is so important for people to kind of be able to recognize this. Um, I'm not knocking on religion. I'm just comparing the similarities for like a lot of you know that there's some religions out there that have been negative, that have traumatized people. So we know that people they tend to turn to religion when they're a little bit down and out or a little bit worried about things. Like, for example, I would guess that um, during 9/11, probably a lot of people turned to God. And when the financial, when the economy goes down, then I would say people turn to God. So when we get in a slightly depressed state, the emotional portion of the brain is more active, and we tend to look for answers. So the way that people get drawn into a cult is they get befriended when they're feeling down and out. And then we have this dogmatic leader who says, I have all the answers that you need. Stop being worried about things. This is the way. That's how people get drawn in. So now, that's how they start getting drawn in. Now what they're going to do is they're going to gain compliance. So that was another social psychology principle. So obedience was submitting to authority. Compliance is when a person engages in a behavior because they were asked to. So it's not so much that an authority figure told them to, it's just they did it because someone asked them to. So in order to get somebody into a cult, now I'm not saying that they're doing this consciously, we're just seeing that this is the pattern that happens, and to be looking for it, is they ask you for a small request. So for example, let's say they ask you to go to a meeting, and at the meeting they'll ask for, oh, you're at the meeting, can you give us some donations? Or, oh, you're at the meeting, would you like to buy some literature? Or can you bring some potluck to the meeting? Or can you help clean up after the meeting? See, we have to be very careful about what we allow ourselves to do, because once we start to comply, we're likely to comply with a bigger request. So we're going to see, remember, compliance was a big this was one of the big ones for social psychology, is we're going to find out that there's a method of compliance called the foot in the door effect. And the foot in the door effect is this, that complying with a small request usually will lead us to comply with a bigger and bigger request. See, because we have this other principle called cognitive dissonance. So we're going to be going over cognitive dissonance, but let me define it for you right here. Cognitive dissonance is the uncomfortable feeling we have when our thoughts do not match our actions. The cognitive dissonance is the uncomfortable feeling that we have when our thoughts do not match our actions. So what we typically tend to do is when we see ourselves doing something, then if we don't believe in it, then that makes us feel uncomfortable. So what we do a lot of times is we just switch our thoughts. Oh, the reason why I'm donating money to this cause is because I believe in it. Or the reason why I'm buying this book is because I believe in it. So we have to be careful with that. Be very careful with complying to other people's wishes. Okay, so then the next thing that starts to happen is they start to isolate you. And this is very, very dangerous. So when individuals are encouraged to associate with only members of the group, this is where it's kind of stepping over the line. I think a lot of you can see that, okay, there's some parallels between religion here, but this is the dangerous one. Is if a group says you shouldn't hang out with anybody else that's, kind of not on this path and kind of not with our group. And the reasons that they'll give is they'll say, you're in too much of an uncomfortable state, you're on your spiritual journey, you really need us around you to constantly give you lots of love and help and encouragement. So that's why you shouldn't allow somebody else to bring you off your path. But we'll find out that what isolation does is isolation creates conformity. Okay, we're at the next stages now. So we already know that isolation is a big warning sign. Be careful, be careful, be careful. The next one, brainwashing, is another warning sign. Okay, but nobody's ever going to say, oh, we're brainwashing you. What you need to look for is this, is the way that someone's brainwashed is they're deprived of food or sleep and put into a state of high arousal, and powerful messages are repeated over and over again. So let's see how this could happen. Let's say that a certain group says, okay, we're going to have a marathon, a love-in marathon, where we're going to spend 24 hours together, and we're going to spend long hours into the evening. We're going to fast. We're just going to do this, and then what we're going to do is somebody's going to be preaching, or somebody's going to be giving us really powerful messages. See, what happens is the brain, the frontal lobe, when the brain gets into a state of stress, like you're really tired, or or you're really hungry, then the brain goes into a state of stress, and the frontal lobe, uh, it gets it gets kind of shut down. And when you give the powerful messages to the kind of amygdala, more the emotional part of the brain, they kind of get locked in. So that's how you brainwash. Like also kind of like how else could you do very stress is like the fire walking is let's get somebody to walk across the hot coals. But before they walk across the hot coals, we're going to preach and preach and preach and say our messages, say our messages, say our messages. And then you're so, those powerful messages as you're very stressed walking over hot coals or very stressed jumping off a certain area or something like that, that would put the brain into a state of stress where those powerful messages become locked in, and that's brainwashing. Okay, so the final thing that if someone does this, then it's going to be very hard to get them out of this group is to gain compliance for a large request. So what I mean by a large request is they're asking you for like large sums of money. I mean, okay, at churches or something that ask you for very small donations of money, whatever you feel like you can give, okay, that's something. But if someone says, okay, we want you now to commit your life to our cause, join us, live in this place, like what Jim Jones did with Guyana, or join, dedicate yourself to organization um, to live in our dorms and be with us constantly, and maybe divorce somebody or go away from your family, something. So now you've got this huge request and the person complies with it. That's going to be really tough to get them out. And the reason is again, back to this cognitive dissonance, is the uncomfortable feeling that we have when our thoughts do not match our actions. If we give everything to another individual, then what that does is that makes us believe in that individual more than ourselves. And so we become so obedient that we start losing the ability to think for ourselves. So all of these principles are involved with the next movie that I'm going to show you, but let's go over them. Social roles is something that I'm going to be going over a little bit more later, but social roles are the roles that we play in society. So we all have different social roles, but it seems like when we assign ourselves these roles, we start to behave this way. So if you have assigned someone, okay, you're the leader and I'm the follower, and you've assigned yourself the role of a follower, or I'm the person that's being instructed, then we tend to conform to those roles, as we tend to say, okay, this is what the followers do, so this is what I'm going to do. If you assign yourself to a leadership role, then you may start to become kind of all-powerful. And that's what happened with Jim Jones. As you're going to see, he became paranoid, and this is very, very common for cult leaders. I'm sure you've heard this with other people before. Is you say, why do these cult leaders get so paranoid and get so over the top? Is it seems to grow and grow and grow. So everybody's giving them power, and they say, I am the leader, I must take control. So what happens is they start to feel like they're all powerful, all powerful. I must do this to stay in control. I must do this. They're the power of social roles. So we're going to be going over a very famous experiment. It's the Zimbardo prison experiment that will reinforce the power of roles.